Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through my best new fantasy books that I have picked up within the third quarter of the year. All of these books have come out this year. I'm specifically highlighting the ones that I read in the third quarter. Before I jump into my favorites though, feel free to let me know what have been your favorite new fantasy releases of 2025. How do you think they compare to fantasy releases of previous years? I am going to look into some top new releases by Reddit's standards. I think that'll be really fun to examine and compare and contrast some of my favorites to the ones that people on Reddit have been shouting from the rooftops about. So if you're interested in that, that'll be coming out very soon. Also, if you want to hear about some stories I've enjoyed that aren't just new fantasy releases, but rather are either backlist fantasy or books from other genres, I'll also be doing that as well. But jumping into it and kicking it off, we're going to start with Engines of War. I feel like every year that there is a new installment in this trilogy, at some point I have mentioned it within a top of the quarter, and it is no different for this third installment. I have really enjoyed this series. It's one that I think is actually saying quite a lot within its themes, and I actually think specifically this third installment has some really great lines that are really further establishing its themes and are really highlighting the discrepancies between and the disparity between people who are part of the working class versus people in power. But who's in power is where you're going to see your perspectives fall into. So the setup for the story is that you follow the Hawkspur Guild, and you're following the matriarch and her children, as well as an additional perspective within the first book. And over the course of the trilogy, of which this is the third book in the trilogy, so it is the conclusion, you are branching out and you are not only getting their perspectives, but you're getting perspectives from other individuals that are either part of different guilds or who are finding themselves a part of the other institutions that are going up against the guild. So it's kind of a technology and magic against tradition. And while you're watching all these people literally go to war with each other, there's some great action scenes in this, and there's some very high stakes. While you are watching these individuals go to war with each other, none of them are really fighting for, truly in their hearts, none of them are really fighting for the greater good, or they're trying to fight on behalf of the people and ensuring that the people have more rights, that they have more say, that they have a little bit more of the ability to participate in the forms of government. At the end of the day, you are just fighting against people who want to win the favor of the general population and the masses so that they can continue to hold on to their power. And then you are looking at individual characters who maybe are wrestling with this and who don't like this, other characters of which are not doing that work whatsoever. They are just fighting because they have personal motivations to move forward. And you see all these different views and you see how all this clashes together, and you're seeing characters betray each other, backstab each other. You're seeing characters that initially were enemies come together and allegiances change and shift. And I really have enjoyed the journey of it all. I wouldn't say necessarily, even though I do appreciate the themes in the story, I wouldn't necessarily say they are mind-blowing or that they made me really think differently about a lot of the things that they're covering, but I appreciate the inclusion of it as it made the stakes feel a lot higher, and it also just felt like a story that it felt realistic. Like we weren't just having action for the sake of action or power struggles for the sake of power struggles. It felt a little bit more real, even when there are some really bizarre fantasy things going on, of which there are many, both in the magic and also in the way that technology fuses with magic in this, and also different magic from different places and how it enters the picture. So there's some pretty off-the-walls magical things transpiring, as well as having this sort of very much rooted in reality conflict occurring. After that, we have Birth of a Dynasty. I think this one is criminally underhyped. It has been, for me, potentially the most underhyped release of the year. I actually think Engines of War is quite underhyped as well, so if you are looking for ones that maybe aren't as talked about as a lot of other new fantasy releases, both of these I think fit within that. But Birth of a Dynasty follows two main perspectives. You do get quite a few over the course of the story, but you have two main perspectives, one of whom his entire clan has been killed, and he is the sole survivor, and another character who is part of a family that still has maintained themselves, but they are, whether they like it or not, through a prophecy, they are somewhat intertwined with the clan that has been wiped out, which puts both targets on her back and his back. And you are following them from the time they are very young as they are pushing through some very challenging circumstances in an effort just basically to survive There's a lot of intrigue in the story. There's a lot of what I'm going to call house wars in the story. If you're somebody who likes that kind of story where you're having these different groups of people all basically going head to head, you're going to find that is true within this. There's a lot of lore in the story that influences why people feel the way they feel now, how the adults surrounding our main perspectives, how they in some ways can't abandon the past, but also it does inform their movement and their actions in the present. And you have, on top of all of that, some really, really devastating stakes. You don't know what's going to happen. There are a lot of twists and turns. There's a lot more to each of the individual characters than you think. Anytime somebody shows up, you know that you're in for more intrigue to be developed because every new character brings something new to the table. And also, this is a story with exceptional gray morality. You have characters that are very, very villainous, but where you think, oh, I just want that character to get taken out because they're obviously the big bad. Then somebody else gets introduced and maybe there's somebody doing something behind the scenes the whole time that you find out and you think, oh, if that big bad gets taken out, this person's going to take over and it's going to be even worse. And there's just so much fighting in the story, and there's so much not just good character development individually, but there's very much a unveiling of the truth and having things revealed to you as you progress that shifts your perspective on things. It's fantastic. And our two main characters do stay young throughout the story. And I really like that the characters are staying young because the author is really taking their time building this story and allowing for you to see how they feel about things and their quest for revenge or their quest to, again, stay alive, fight for survival. You watch the struggle, which is exciting as a first entry into a series because you know that you're going to buy into that struggle the more and more that it builds. Really think this is quite underhyped, and I definitely want more people to pick it up. Last for today, very different from the previous two, we have Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. This is very, very cute. It's the stereotypical way that people describe a lot of cozy fantasy, which is it was a warm hug of a book. And I had really enjoyed this author's previous work. I was a little unsure when I went to pick this one up. Is lightning going to strike twice? Am I going to have fun with this one? And while I don't think it's reinventing the wheel for cozy fantasy, I don't necessarily think it was the most impactful or that I really fell head over heels for it. At the end of the day, if I'm in the mood for something that is cozy, this fit the bill fantastically. I really think it does the genre very, very nicely to a point where it feels almost more like contemporary fantasy, or I should say contemporary fiction with sprinkles of fantasy. And for me, that just kind of made it that much easier to kind of soak up and sit in and just enjoy the process of it. There's found family in this story. There's literal familial relationships in this story. There's the feeling of isolation with grief, and also characters who are taking care of people who are seen as other and different and difficult just because they're not necessarily like everyone else. And so I thought the way that all of that was captured was great. Additionally, there is also the theme of your life might actually be really quite nice and it might fit for you, but there is this constant reassessment where you question if you're living life the right way because it's not what everybody else would say is the way that you're supposed to live or what you're supposed to have at certain points in your life. And so I really appreciate that as well. Something that I think cozy fantasy does for a lot of individuals is it doesn't have these sweeping giant stakes. It doesn't maybe examine entire societies and ways of governing, but rather it looks at the everyday things that individuals struggle with, and then it's kind of tapping into that. And we don't see that, or we hadn't previously seen that as frequently in fantasy books, and I think cozy fantasy has been a great outlet for that kind of exploration, that kind of quiet character development. And I think that the story is no different. As for the premise, you follow this young woman who had an exceptional amount of power, and she used a lot of it to bring her aunt back after finding her dead in their garden. And in doing this, she lost a lot of her magic. It should have come back by now. It hasn't come back. And so throughout the course of the story, you're not only looking at the struggle of what that's been like, but also you're seeing that maybe there's a path toward restoring her magic. And you kind of see how the whole family and other eccentric people that come through this inn, how they all kind of come together to help one another out. It's very sweet. It's very darling. And as stated, as cliche as it is, it's very much a warm hug of a book. That's it though for my top 3 best new fantasy books. I have been going through over the course of the year and doing new fantasy releases wrap-ups for basically everything I pick up, as well as having done top 3 new fantasy releases for the previous quarters. So if you're interested in any of those, I'll have those linked. If you're interested in the books themselves, I'll have those linked as well. And then if you have any of your own recommendations based off of the ones that I liked that I talked about today, feel free to let me know what you'd recommend. I also asked at the beginning to let me know what your favorite releases of this year have been. How do you feel like this year compares to previous years? Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.